Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this panel meeting of the Education, Libraries and Localism Cabinet Panel on Wednesday, the 10th of February. My name is Terry Duris. I'm the Cabinet Member for Education, Libraries and Localism, and I shall be chairing this meeting this morning. Before we start the meeting, I have to read the following announcements. With regard to COVID-19, attendance at this meeting. Due to the coronavirus pandemic, the Council will be holding this meeting electronically in accordance with the relevant regulations. Members of the public may also attend this meeting in an electronic capacity, and there is a link on the Council's website for them to do so. Members of the Council are asked to keep their microphones switched off until called to speak and to switch their microphones off once they have finished speaking. Cameras may be left on throughout the meeting if members wish. If you experience connection or other technical issues, it may help to switch your camera off. Cameras should be switched off. Cameras should be switched on if and when speaking in the meeting. To indicate a wish to speak, members should use the raised hand function. Use of the meeting chat function is exclusively for voting. At the end of the debate of each item of business, there will be a vote. Members should vote using the meeting chat function by indicating for, against, or abstain. I will declare the result after each vote. Breaks of at least 15 minutes will be held every 2 hours and will be taken after a speaker in the debate has finished speaking. If we are voting, the vote will be concluded before the break is taken. Any other breaks will be incorporated as appropriate. I understand that we have one membership change, and that is Jonathan Kay is substituting for Caroline Clapper for this meeting only. I'm now going to go around and ask each of the members just to introduce themselves and identify which electoral division they represent. So starting, good morning, Judy.
Good morning, Terry. My name is Judy Billing and I represent Hitchin North as its county councillor.
Thank you. Annie?
Yes, good morning. Annie Brewster, and I represent Harpenden Rural.
Jonathan?
Good morning, all. Yes, hello, good morning. I represent Wear South.
Thank you. I don't think Michael Hearn is with us, is he? No. Nick?
Nick Hollinghurst, I'm the member for Tring.
Thank you very much. Jeff?
Yes, good morning. Jeff Jones, member for Buntingford.
Thank you. Asif?
Good morning, I'm Asif Khan, I'm a member for North Watford.
Thank you, Asif. Mark?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning,
sorry,
Chairman.
Mark Mills Bishop, apologies.
Yeah. Good morning, Chairman. Mark Mills Bishop, Conservative member for Hampstead End and Turnford, and Vice Chairman of this panel.
Thank you. Alan?
I'm Alan Clancy and I'm the County Councillor for Borehamwood South, and good morning to everybody.
Thank you, Alan. Anthony?
Good morning. Anthony Rowlands, County Councillor for St Albans East.
Thank you, Anthony. Richard?
Good morning, Chairman. Richard Thake, County Councillor for Nebworth and Connecticut.
And Mark Watkin?
Having had a rehearsal, good morning, everybody. Councillor Mark Watkin, I am the
County Councillor for Nascot Park Division in Watford.
Thank you. And I'm the County Councillor for Bridgewater. We have no apologies to date, so I now have to carry on and read the following statement as it relates particularly to this meeting. And this relates to members' interests, a reminder of disclosable pecuniary interests and declarable interests. Members are advised that in respect of the debate concerning the Council's integrated plan, including the setting of the Council tax precept, the Standards Committee has exercised its power to grant a dispensation to all Hertfordshire County Councillors from the requirement to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or declarable interest. Accordingly, there is no requirement for any councillor to make a declaration of interest in respect of this item of business. Members are reminded that Section 106 of the Local Government Finance Act 1992 provides that if a member is in arrears of council tax for 2 months or more, and they are present at a meeting where the council's budget or the precept is being considered, then they should declare this, and any such member must not vote on any matter relating to the setting of the council's budget or the precept. The provisions of Section 106 of the Local Government Finance Act 1992 apply even if there is an arrangement to pay off the arrears. So we can now move to the first substantive item on the agenda, which is the minutes of the last meeting held on the 10th of December 2020. And I'm inviting members to agree to the previous minutes by voting in the meeting chat for, against, or abstain. I think we can take that as being agreed. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Stephanie. So we now, item 2, public petitions. There are none notified. And item 3, the integrated plan 2021-2022, and then further 2024 to 2025 for education, libraries and localism. And we welcome Faisal Mir, the Assistant Director, Finance and Business Support, to present this paper. Good morning, Faisal.
Morning, Chair. Morning, all. Thanks for having me. Just to give a brief introduction and to put this in context, first of all, so this is in relation to the Council's budget proposals, our integrated plan proposals. The proposals obviously already gone through the scrutiny process, but as we do every year, this is a panel's particular opportunity to also comment on the proposals, and it's part of the glide path of the proposals through to Cabinet and then on to Council. So the paper, the panel paper before you does 2 things. I won't dwell on the first, but I'll dwell on the second for a couple of minutes. So the paper gives a bit of an overview of the integrated plan across the Council and the position there. I won't dwell on that, but happy to answer any questions that members may have. The real substance, I suppose, of today's discussion is the paper signposts to the relevant section of the integrated plan document. So with the Chair's permission, what I was going to do for a couple of minutes, because I know it's a big document, a bit dizzying to, is maybe just walk members through the pertinent pages of the IP pack, no more than a couple of minutes. You'll be glad to hear I won't go through everything, because I'm sure members are well acquainted with the pack, but it's just useful to help orientate everyone about particularly what we're looking at. So if we start on page 136 of the pack, this page outlines changes to the portfolio's revenue budgets I mean, in a nutshell, there are not many or very few significant revenue changes. The only two above 100,000, if we use that as a bit of an arbitrary benchmark, is there's a very standard recognition of the inflation on our library's commissioning. As you'd imagine, we feed in contractual inflation wherever it's appropriate across the council. And the only other item above 100k is there's a reversal here on OP26 of a one-off pressure that was in the budget this year, but then gets taken out in future years. Beyond that, there are not many significant changes on revenue. So I'll quickly skirt over revenue, because the really large changes, and where there's some really good news, is on capital. So scrolling down just to orientate members, this is on page 139. And very usefully, what this page does and subsequent pages do is to outline key changes to the capital budget. And here we can see there's some quite significant increases to the capital budget for the portfolio. So again, just maybe doing it by exception, we see there a new £3 million budget line in relation to the relocation of the central stocks unit. There's a reflection of the plans around the Ware Library. And I suppose the biggest item, and again, happy to take questions on this, is then there's a series of items in relation to special educational needs and disability educational provision. So this item on severe learning difficulties and profound neurological impairment, through to the item here on North Herts, as the overview paper talks about, that there's a total of £53 million worth of new investment in that SEND educational provision being put forward, which really is good news and reflects that demand we're seeing across the county and nationally. There's a line in there about the reprovision at Barnwell School as well that's worth mentioning. But those are really the key headlines. I was going to try and keep it short and sweet, Chair, if that's appropriate. But as I said, very happy to answer any questions, and Simon and Taryn and Alex and colleagues can help with any specifics as well.
Yep. Thank you very much indeed, Faisal. And I'm sure that sort of some of the nuances may well come out in the questioning. And I see we have a hand up from Judy already, and I'll come to Judy in just a moment. I think in terms of the £53 million which you've mentioned in terms of the special schools, colleagues will recall that we discussed at our last meeting the excellent paper that was presented by the team for special schools planning going forward, and the need for that. And I think this helps to address those requirements and those pressures, and I think that's very important. But I'll come now to Judy Billing.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
Sorry, so many things to switch on before one can even speak. I wasn't able to be part of the IP discussions on education, libraries and localism this year. So if I'm coming to this slightly slowly, I apologise. I'm of course delighted to see the capital expenditure quoted here for improvements to special educational needs provision, which seems to have occupied much of my casework time since I became a county councillor nearly 8 years ago now. But actually it was a more generic question I had, which related to the strategic direction overview paper on page 121, because I found under key risks in achieving IP proposals, I found the line failure of schools to support the county council. Such a strange way of wording anything, including funding of key HCC activities, that I thought I'd like to know how that failure might be recognised and manifest itself, because it seems such a strange thing to say.
I think that's probably a question that is aimed more at Simon Newland, I think, than Faisal. So Simon, I think you're on the call. So would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I want to start off by saying, Judy, that of course it's a risk rather than something which we expect to happen. But
yeah, sure.
Because it's so significant, we wanted to mention it. And I think there are two dimensions to it. One is the specific dimension around the financial support for our school improvement work with Hearts for Learning. And that is funded for maintained schools by dedelegation of their funding. And each year, schools forum votes on confirming that funding or not, and that's based on a consultation with schools. And there is a risk, of course, that if things are very difficult for schools, that they wouldn't support that dedelegation, which is about £2.5 million, and that would place us in a very difficult position. But at the last consultation, I think it was around 85% of our schools, when they were consulted, were in favour of that continuing. So it's a risk, but I don't think it's a major risk. And then there is the more generic issue of the successful functioning of our education system locally does depend on a good partnership between the county council and schools. And were that to fracture in any way, then that would have kind of serious adverse consequences. So a lot of our work is directed towards keeping that partnership strong and healthy.
I think the other thing to just mention, Judy, is that one of the slight curiosities is that we actually can only give a one-year contract to Hearts for Learning because they are funded, as Simon has said, by virtue of the dedelegation. And that is only approved on an annual basis by Schools Forum and the schools themselves. So if you like, it does have that knock-on effect, which is frustrating in a sense, whilst, as Simon has said, the overriding or the overwhelming element is for support of that. We cannot ever take it for granted, but we're very sure that, or we're very confident that schools would continue to recognise the value of the work that Hearts for Learning do, and they are regarded highly across the county and across the country. But
could be further under threat, Chair, if I could just come back very briefly. Were we to get enthusiastic about the development of new free schools that may not share some of our aspirations in education later on this agenda? I just pose it as a concern.
I hear that concern, and I understand it. I think in the overall context of it, we've got 500 and something schools, 530 schools. Sure. And we do have a number of academies, and we do have new schools that are arriving, which could well be free schools, and certainly there's effectively a free school potentially up in the Stevenage area. But if you take that as a percentage of the overall estate, if you like to call it like that, then that one individual free school deciding to do its own thing would not be a major issue. But having said that, it's incumbent upon Hearts for Learning, which I think they do, to make sure that the offer that they make to schools is an attractive offer, it's an appropriate offer, and it works well. And of course, Hearts for Learning, because they are a schools owned company, can actually go out and offer their services to other areas outside Hertfordshire if they need to. And I have a feeling that they may have done in the past anyway.
Thank you for now.
Let me come to Anthony Rowlands now. Anthony. Thank you, Judy.
Okay.
Thank you, Judy.
Okay.
Thank you, Terry. I've got two slightly discrete questions. Number one, looking at page 139, where there's an indication about the meeting the rising demand for school places. And I just wonder whether, I don't know, maybe this is to Simon, is there as yet any indication as to whether part of that rising demand is actually being sourced from pupils who are leaving private schools because of economic issues and parental difficulties in paying fees? Are we identifying any sort of trend there? I have got a second question, but maybe I could leave you with that one.
Yeah, sure. Simon? Yeah, sure. Simon?
Yeah. I mean, we haven't seen that as a particular issue at the moment, but there is a kind of, I mean, and one of the ways that that might manifest is if we saw a substantial increase in in-year admissions from those sources, and we haven't seen that happening. But, you know, there is a time lag between economic difficulties and people having to pull their children out of the school system. So it's something that could happen, but so far not visibly.
Anthony, did you have a second question?
Thank you, Terry. Second question relates. My thoughts turn back to the Children's Services Committee a week or so ago, where we had a report on elective home education. This is mentioned very fleetingly on page 244 in the pack. And I just wonder, it struck me that what we heard about on that occasion very much was related to schools and to education in general, as well as obviously to children's welfare. And I'm really making a quite rhetorical mark. I think that is something we ought, as an education panel, to very much have on our radar. I don't know which direction it's going, but there is a trend that predates COVID of a quite rapid increase in the number of children who are home educating, and that does have an impact on the wider school system. Thank you. That's more a comment.
Yeah, and I think we'll take that, if we may, Anthony, as a comment, because elected home education, whilst potentially it has a small impact, the actual substance of it is within the Children's Services brief. So I think if we take it as a comment, and then we'll move on, if we may, to Jonathan Kay.
Thank you very much, Chairman. My question was probably more for Taryn, because it was in relation to the proposal to move Ware Library. I just wondered what the capacity, the size of the proposed new library is likely to be compared to the existing site. Thank you.
Taryn, I'm not sure that you're going to be in a position to answer that at this precise moment, but would you like to give it a go?
Yes, of course. So the plans for Ware Library are very much in their early stages. So what we wanted to make sure we did was put this marker down for this funding in the IP, because that, of course, is the right thing to do. The site is quite a tight site. It's a site that we own already in Ware, and it is a site which we are looking potentially to work with colleagues in adult care as well, for potentially some housing above the site, with the library on the ground floor. What we do with all our new libraries is obviously set out a specification of what library services need to be delivered, and ensure that they at least match what we currently have. So I think that the issue with the current Ware Library is it's sort of over several sort of parts of a building. It's a very old building, lots of rooms and that kind of thing. So the opportunity to put it in basically almost what would be a shop front and a completely open layout is great for us and great for our users. So whether the size will be exactly the same, I can't say at the moment, Jonathan, but the provision will be a lot better for our customers, and we will ensure that working with our property colleagues and colleagues in adult care as well.
Thanks very much.
I think if I may, Jonathan, also just add that you only have to look at the new Hatfield Library, which of course is not open to browsing at the present time, but that moved into a vacant retail premises. And I think one of the points about that, of course, is that it's helped to regenerate the footfall within the area that it serves, and in that particular part of White Lion Square in Hatfield, which I'm immensely proud of. And it also picks up the, if you like, the revitalisation of the high streets generally, moving perhaps from a more retail orientated street scene to something else which people will go to, like libraries. Mark Watkin.
Thank you, Chair. And this will be very brief. Just a couple of points, picking up on what Judy's led with, and I absolutely agree. I'm delighted to see the capital sums being put aside for the growth in special schools. I think that's absolutely essential. And her comment about the risks. Yes, I think the trouble is we have a fractured education system. Unfortunately, we have academies and free schools on one side, although they're much the same, and then they have the community schools answerable to the county, and there's always going to be that tension. You don't have that central point of control that used to exist. I will just make an observation that I think that the Schools Forum does an excellent job at sort of bringing all those groups together, and I would want to compliment the chair, Alan Gray, who does an excellent job at just keeping everybody on task and bringing everybody into a sense of cohesive view on the world. So long live Alan Gray and long live the Schools Forum as it stands at the moment and its approach to the wider needs of education and children. And the other comment I was going to pick up on is this Libraries for Life move, which is just worrying for reasons that are beyond the control of the County Council in the short term as to when that will be delivered, because it's just everything is held in suspension, and that's a shame. Other than that, I don't intend to make any great comments on the budget because we did that at scrutiny. And we'll have a more detailed, or more politically aimed discussion at full council. And just for the record, because it's what we tend to do at these things, we should be abstaining when it comes to the vote. But it's not really a hostile position; it's just a neutral position. So we reserve our right later on. But that's really what I want to say.
I'll ask Taryn to say a word in a moment about Libraries for Life, and she may also want to touch upon the contractual element of that and the importance of the contract. But what I would also, just before, whilst Taryn is gathering her thoughts on that, just to mention, of course, that Alan Gray, who you've mentioned, the head teacher of Sandringham, it's a great accolade for him and also for Hertfordshire that a couple of years ago he was crowned as the head teacher of the year in the Pearson Teaching Awards, which is a real accolade for him. And there is only one head teacher of the year, so something we should all be, if you like, very proud of and reflect in his success. But Taryn, do you want to answer the question about Libraries for Life?
Yes, I mean, I did bring a paper to Cabinet Panel, I think it was in late October last year, which set out, as best as we could at that point, a plan for where the library service would need to be and the level of recovery that we would need to be at before we would be in a position to transfer. Obviously, since then, we have gone into 2 lockdowns, so the recovery that we made over the summer has actually slightly taken a step back. I think that paper holds in terms of where we will need to be in terms of the numbers of visits, the income that's coming back in, and all those brilliant services that libraries usually do, getting sort of being recovered and going in the right direction of travel. So at the moment, it's very difficult, whilst we're still in the pandemic and in lockdown, to understand sort of what those timings would be. Just to give Cabinet Panel some reassurance, I did meet with the trustees maybe about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and you know, they're still extremely committed. They, like yourselves, are very keen to understand when the transfer might happen, but still hugely committed, and actually have used sort of the time very wisely in thinking in sort of progressing the organisation and the business planning and doing their thinking as well, and being through some training as well. So I think what we probably need to do is, as we come out of this lockdown, is to sort of review that paper that I brought in October and give you a sense of where we are, And I think that's the only right thing to do for the Libraries for Life trustees as well, to give you a feel. But I completely agree with you, Mark. This time last year, we were almost there with signing the contract, and we were very much in that period of being almost ready to transfer. And as you say, it's sort of very frustrating for the trustees, for our staff, and obviously ourselves. But the right thing to do by all organisations is to only transfer when we are all ready to, and the service is in the best possible position.
If I can just respond, Terry, very quickly. Thank you, Terry, and I welcome that paper. I think it is important that we are keeping close to it, and yeah, the sooner the better. I
think, Mark, if I could sort of almost step into some of the words of Professor Jonathan Van Tam. If you think of the library transfer, what we don't want to do is we don't want to transfer the library service to Libraries for Life and giving them a mountain to climb coming out of the lockdown and the virus. We actually want to transfer it when they are the mountain has been climbed and they're near the top, so they can actually see the. I'm going to wax lyrical here. They can see the benefit of the vista of the new library service. Nobody cringed at that point, so I'm going to quickly move on to Asif.
Thank you, Terry. My questions are actually just a little queries on the budget movements that Faisal highlighted. So on page 136, NE 11, which talked about children's services efficiencies, and it mentions there's a £96,000 efficiencies. So what are those efficiencies that are being highlighted within the children's services? Do you want me to carry on with my other questions? They are related to just some of the sheets. I think we'll do one after the other.
Yeah, please.
So there's that. And then on page 139, it talks. There's a section about new capital bids and secondary school expansion, which comes to 6,130,000 on page 139. But on page 141, on the second line down about secondary school expansion programmes, there seems to be a rephasing of about 11 million or almost 12 million that the schools expansions aren't going to happen. They're going to be done in future years. So just a bit of clarity on those numbers. Though on one page it's 6 million, the other page it's 11 million. So what's going on there? Just a bit of clarity there. Thank you.
Okay. Simon, very much in your bailiwick this.
Yeah, thank you. I'll deal with the capital one first and then say something about efficiencies, and if Faisal wants to add anything, then we'll do so. Yeah, I'm afraid it's a bit convoluted the way we present the programme of secondary expansions from year to year. So what you've seen, Asif, is when a project drops from one wave of the programme to the next, say it goes back for a year for some reason, then a kind of on one of the budget lines there'll be a negative, and you've seen one of those budget lines that you've drawn attention to, and on another budget line there'll be a kind of compensating positive. So that's why there appears to be a drop in expenditure on secondary expansion on one budget line, but it's not actually a real drop in terms of projects. It's just that they've fallen from one year to another for a range of different reasons, and the money reappears in the line below. So there's no change to what we're going to do. And as you know from the reports that comes through to panel, whenever we put new projects through, we keep, if you like, a kind of running total of the resources that we've got available and uncommitted at any particular time. In terms of the efficiencies, there's a range of, each year we go through the kind of minutiae of the Children's Services budget, and that's both Children's Services panel and Ed panel, and come up with a range of savings proposals that we can bring forward. And I can't recall off the top of my head what the 93,000 was. It may be that Faisal can, but it would be things like mileage payments, where at the moment in particular we're looking at the extent to which changing patterns of work will lead to reductions in mileage claims over the next few years. But can I sort of toss that one over to Faisal to see if he's got any further elaborations of that?
Yeah.
No, I think you covered it nicely. The biggest item from my recollection, as Simon has already talked about, is the mileage savings. So this is where, as we're doing now, and as we won't all be entirely working this way, but we have an expectation that there will be more virtual working, more flexible working, and as you'd imagine across children's services, that's only a very small. It's probably quite a prudent assumption about what we could save on mileage, because as a start of a 10 really.
Okay, no, thank you.
And I am aware, of course, that the reduction in the mileage claims for county councillors during this last year in terms of COVID has been not insignificant. Mark Mills-Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was a question for Taryn, really, but Faisal might be able to help. In terms of loss of income in the library services for fees and charges, are we getting that back, or is it now filtering through, or are they doing it on a phase basis through a quarterly return? But it's making sure that we get as much or most of our loss of earnings fees and charges back. Thank you, Chairman.
I'm going to pass this one to Faisal, but my understanding is that it's all wrapped up within the resources element. But Faisal, can you add a little bit of meat to the bone?
No, exactly. It's like you say, Terry, it doesn't get shown within the portfolio, because actually more broadly we're showing all the COVID related items or financial implications centrally, exactly as you described, Terry. So there's a number of different funding streams coming from central government on COVID, but there's an unring-fenced COVID grant which is there to cover financial risks. And I think, as you alluded to, Mark, there is also compensation for councils for lost income, which again Taryn can probably add to, but I imagine the libraries will definitely qualify for that. Although, as Terry said, we make that claim across the council, so we probably couldn't disentangle exactly. It won't show as a separate line within portfolio, is what I'm trying to say. It will show as a single line across the council in terms of money coming from central government to compensate for that loss of income.
And I think this compensatory payment or claim is the one that has a 5% excess at the front end of it, and then local authorities can claim 75% of the remaining. It's very much focused on those trading elements, which, for example, libraries would be, but also in terms of districts and boroughs, car parking charges and things like that. That's where a lot of the benefit might arise. But Faisal, did you want to say anything else before I go to Taryn?
No, the only thing that's probably worth mentioning is it, just as much as it applies to libraries, it also applies to the music service, which is also obviously part of the portfolio. So it's worth just pointing that out, Terry, that there's that implication, and similarly some compensation for that understandable loss of income from schools being closed, because as you'd imagine, music services losing significant income compared to prior years given the current situation. Yeah.
Thank you. Taryn, did you want to add anything?
No, I think you've fully covered it. Thank you.
Okay. Covered it for your benefit, Mark Mills-Bishop? Yes?
Yeah, no, thank you very much indeed, Chairman. Good. Thank you, Faisal.
Okay. I'm not seeing any other hands, so I think probably we can turn our attention to the recommendation, which is at item 3.1, 3.2, where we've been invited to comment to Cabinet on the proposals. I think I'm going to take the opportunity to say that we've recognised the IP, and I think it's probably going to. I'm hoping it's going to be fair to say that there are no dissenting views within this panel with regard to the IP as presented. And I do understand absolutely what Mark said earlier on about his group voting within this panel. And then the second one is to identify any issues that it feels the Cabinet should consider in finalising the integrated plan proposals. I don't think there's anything very specific, but colleagues will have picked up some of the comments, particularly just thinking about the risk which have been identified and which we must be alert to. So on that basis, I'm going to ask if you would be kind enough to vote in the chat for, against, or abstain, please. Thank you very much. Those proposals have been agreed. Thank you to Faisal for joining us this morning. Thank you also to Taryn Pearson-Rose for joining us, and thank you to everybody for very constructive discussions and questions. So we move now to item 4, the County Council admission arrangements for 2022-2023, and we welcome Jane Avery, who is going to take us through I think it's the 4 recommendations that we have in front of you for today. So over to you, Jane.
Thank you, Terry, and good morning. As Terry said, I'm just going to go through the proposals for amendment to Hertfordshire's admission arrangements for 22-23. These proposals have been consulted on for 6 weeks between the 26th of October and the 6th of December, following a County Council Cabinet agreement in October last year. The proposals are relatively minor, and the consultation itself was, although county-wide, very low-key, with only 25 responses in all to that county-wide consultation. The recommendations for amending the County Council's arrangements are to amend the definition of nearest schools for primary, and that is to include within that definition all faith schools that prioritise children on the basis of their location, home location, for example, with living within the church's local area or parish, before faith, practice or membership. The second proposal is to clarify our existing practice about the allocation of places to twins and multiple births, and basically that's just bringing into line our practice and clarifying our policy to ensure that every twin and multiple birth child can get allocated the same school if that is their parental preference, if one child has been allocated a place at that school, regardless of the rule or criterion that first child has been allocated under. And the final change is a reduction in the published admission number at Markyate Village School, reducing that published admission number from 45 to 30. That's a direct request from the school head and governing body. Is directly related to school organisation and financial constraints. When the school doesn't fill with an intake of 45, they have smaller class numbers and it becomes increasingly difficult to actually afford the amount of teachers required to meet Key Stage 1 class size legislation. The vast majority of responses, vast majority within the 25 we got, were supportive of all
all three proposals, and the disagreements were really fundamentally about a lack of understanding of the faith proposal around nearest, as opposed to disagreeing with what we're actually trying to achieve. I don't think there are no financial implications to the proposals apart from putting Markyate Village School on a more sound financial basis going forward, and I can confirm that there will be enough places across that area for young people and their families to access a local school place. The forecasts are showing that. So I think I don't need to say any more, Terry, but obviously open to questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Jane. I think perhaps just for clarification, I should mention that Markyate Village School sits within my county division. And of course, colleagues will recall that we discussed this prior to it going out to consultation, all these 4 items last year. And now we're seeing this back as a result of the consultation and the next step forward. I've got 2 hands showing at this moment, so we'll start with Mark Mills-Bishop.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Jane, for explaining that. I've had to get my head around it a number of times. It's almost like trying to explain the offside rule in football.
Oh, don't go there. I don't understand it.
I've lost more hair than I care to would like to. But the question I had was, where did this actually originate from? And was it a consortium from the diocese, or was it purely and simply a request to County Council to look at this and to examine the implications of it?
Well, interestingly, it actually stemmed initially from a complaint we had from one of our village faith schools, a CEVA school, about the definition of nearest, and there was a lack of clarity that school felt about our nearest definition, and they did felt it discriminated against them. We had an awful lot of toing and froing around that, and the diocese was brought in, and during those discussions around our definition, they suggested potentially we could look at expanding our definition. We did a little bit of analysis and modelling, and that there would actually be very little impact, pure impact on children numbers and satisfaction, and therefore could see no reason not to bring that forward to ask members of their views. So it did stem from a school, and then through a more elaborate conversation with the diocese.
Okay. All right. No, thank you. It's very clear. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Richard Thake.
Thank you, Chairman. Merely to repeat, I think, the declaration that I made when we first discussed this. My wife is chair of governors of our local JMI, which is a C of EVA. And clearly, I think for transparency, I need to declare that, but I don't see that this debars me from voting on the matter in any way, shape or form, because there's no personal interest here. So.
No. And it is a county admissions policy anyway.
That's right. It won't actually impact upon the admission arrangements or allocations of those VA schools. It will just impact upon the children who are included within the county council's definition of nearest.
Absolutely accepted, Chairman, but notwithstanding, I think transparency is everything in local government.
That's fine. Thank you, Richard. Asif.
I was trying to, I spent the whole of last night trying to understand the difference. I still haven't cracked it, and that's why I thought, let's try to get the layman, if in really, building up methods, because some schools, even academies and free schools, they do adopt the methodology of Herts County Council when they adopt their entrance. So it may not, it may address specific Herts County Council maintained schools, but it will have implications on wider schools. For example, in Watford, there's a COV school that's opened relatively recently, so it will have an impact there. So I just want to understand what the impact, the difference, the change it has.
Okay, I think
it's a very swift ball passing by me to Jane.
I was expecting that ball, Terry, and I've got my hand here ready to catch it. I hope I don't drop it. Two questions really there, Asif. First of all, this is only about the County Council's admission arrangements. So it is up to absolutely any own-admitting authority school to adopt our arrangements if they wish. If they do wish, part of their consultation this year would have had to have been to make the same changes that we are making to our arrangements. And that is obviously a decision that's absolutely for the admitting authority of that school, the governing body, the trust, or the MAT involved in that individual case. Most schools that we allocate for at the moment are previously community schools, as opposed to VA schools, and they understand our arrangements and just want to continue with the arrangements as they were when they were community schools. So we haven't really come across an issue around that particular part. As for the change, it's relatively small, and it introduces, I think, 23 new schools within our definition of nearest. Currently, our definition of nearest will include all schools except those who prioritise any children on the basis of faith. So regardless of where that priority sits in their rules, we wouldn't include them as a nearest school for our definition if they allocate any children on the basis of faith. And this was a query that was raised by the diocese. Why is that? You exclude some schools if they prioritise local children first, because that's what the fundamental reason for us having a nearest rule is. So if children do want to get into their local school, they're very high up the priority list. So we looked at this, and there was around, as I said, I think there's 23 schools in the county, all Church of England VA schools, that although they've prioritised some children by faith, they actually prioritise children by distance or locality first. So it would be, for example, children who have got an EHCP, children who are looked after, children who are siblings, and then children who live within X area. And then it would move on to children who go to local church regularly. They're the schools who are now included within our definition of faith, of nearest for primary, or will be from September 22. Previously, they were all excluded, regardless of where that criteria sat. Does that make sense?
It does. So it makes it easier, I suppose, for parents. So it's almost loosening the rules rather than making it more difficult. Okay, all right.
Yeah.
And that's fine.
I think the other thing, and I hope I'm not going to muddy the waters here, that there was a recognition by a number of village schools who happen to be faith-based schools, that it actually opens up the opportunity for their local children to go to the schools, even though their local school, even though they may not necessarily be a member of that practicing member of that faith.
Yeah. Okay. No, thank you. Thanks.
And there is a general enthusiasm with the diocese to encourage schools to cater for their local community before catering for the faith-based community. This is obviously the Church of England diocese, but it's still absolutely a decision for those individual schools.
Yeah.
Okay. No, thank you.
Thank you, Asif. Mark.
Thank you very much, Terry. Yes, it is interesting, and I think, you know, it's the difference between inclusion and exclusion. I think that most Church of England schools, from what I know of them, really want to include the community around them. What they will say to the community is that you come here, your child will be given an education, will incorporate and be based on our faith and our principles that faith embodies. So, you know, that is the difference. They're not saying you have to be a member of our faith to be there, but if you come, that is the kind of education you're going to have. Where does it leave Catholic schools? Because Catholic schools take a more exclusive view, which is you have to have proved that you are an active Catholic before you can attend our schools, which I find sad, but they are oversubscribed by the Catholic community, so they clearly are felt to be very important to that community. But where do we stand on those, just as my interest?
Well, I think firstly, the thing to emphasise is that our change in rule doesn't mention a specific faith. This is not about Church of England schools. It's about any faith schools. So if a Jewish school, a Catholic school, a Hindu school, if we had them, decided to prioritise local children before its faith community, they would be included in that rule. You're absolutely right with Catholic schools. They are set up for children of the Catholic community, and that's in almost, I think it's in every overarching statement, in every set of admission arrangements you have for a Catholic school. And so they exclude themselves from inclusion in that definition because they always prioritise Catholic children first, either by membership or practice or both in some cases.
Thank you, Jane. That's been very helpful. And just to say, yes, of course, we will support the recommendations going forward.
Thank you, Mark. That's very helpful. Thank you. Jeff Jones.
Yeah, sorry, Terry, delay there. I'm flicking between screens. No, it's just a very simple question, really, for Jane on the consultation responses or lack of. The fact there was only 25 and there were 2 objections. One can only assume that the majority are happy with it. I mean, how do you see that? Are you concerned of the lack of response, or do you just accept that that is the reason people are quite happy with it?
I think if you don't have a lot of response, people think it's not going to impact upon me, and I'm not really involved enough, don't really care enough to respond. I do think a lot of people had lots of stuff on their plate in the autumn term, as we all do. But I genuinely think, regardless of the timing of this consultation, we wouldn't have had a great deal of response. It went out to all schools. It was in local papers. We had posters. So, it's on our website. So, we did the usual consultation. We went out as much as we could to alert the community to this. So I'm not overly concerned about the small numbers because, as I said, the modelling we've done means it's only going to have a very small impact upon how allocations are actually going to work. So there aren't going to be any surprises that come out of the first allocation process we do with this amended rule. It isn't going to be children suddenly going to different schools or children in one community who suddenly aren't going to get school places. That's not going to happen. So I'm fairly relaxed about it.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much.
And it's up to the public to respond as they feel appropriate, as Jane has said. Anthony.
Thank you, Terry. Just a brief comment. I'm grateful to Jane for her sort of clarifying explanations. That's been really helpful. And I certainly welcome what seems like an initiative from the local diocese, and I think they've set a good and positive example. So thank you. Just a comment.
Thank you, Anthony. I'm not seeing any other hands, so I'm going to move, if we may, to the recommendation, which is on the papers, and to recommend to the Cabinet that the County Council admission arrangements are amended as below. So if I could ask you to vote for, against and abstain, please. And that item has been agreed. Thank you all very much indeed. And I think I'm right in saying that it was agreed unanimously, was it not? Teresa, was it unanimous?
Yes, Terry, it was unanimous.
It was. Thanks, Stephanie. Okay, so we move now to item 5, the capital funding approval to support the delivery of education provision in Stevenage. Now, colleagues, you will see that there is a part 2 item to this. I would like to think that we can probably deal with all of this in part 1, but recognising the confidential nature of part 2. Having said that, there are no recommendations in part 2 to have to come back or to go out to part 2 and then come back in again. So I would ask you not to reference part 2 in the part 1 discussions, and if we do need to, then we will move to part 2. But if we can deal with it under part 1, I think that will be good. And we welcome Kate Marr, who is going to take us through this. Good morning, Kate.
Thank you. Good morning, Terry. Thank you. Panel, this report seeks your support to a capital contribution towards a Department for Education-led scheme to deliver additional secondary education provision in Stevenage. You may remember Cabinet back in 2018 previously approved the making of a compulsory purchase order to secure a freehold interest in the Barnwell East school site in Stevenage to ensure sufficient secondary school places across the town for the future. The Michaela School has submitted a bid to open a secondary free school in Stevenage, and the DfE is working with Michaela to deliver a new 6th form entry secondary school on the former Barnwell East school site. The Stevenage Education Support Centre occupies part of the existing old school buildings on that site, which the DfE intends to demolish. It has agreed to include the reprovision of the ESC buildings within its overall scheme, and it's seeking a capital contribution from the County Council towards the project. We do have Section 106 monies that have been secured for from housing developers towards secondary education provision, but not all of the monies are yet in the bank. This scheme offers an opportunity to address the current condition issues of the ESC, as well as deliver a brand new 6 FE secondary school. Panel is therefore asked to recommend in Section 3 a capital contribution and approval to forward funding pending receipt of Section 106 monies. The details of that cost contribution and the risks are set out in the accompanying Part 2 report. Happy to take any questions.
Oh, excuse me, Judy Billing. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I try always to understand the constraints upon us of having a free school imposed on us, really, by DfE. I understand that. I understand we have little discretion, although in this particular case, I have really quite enormous worries, having researched what I have had the chance to do about the Michaela School, I think in Brent. And I try not to be further prejudiced by the fact that Suella Braverman was involved in the development of that school and how little I would trust her with my children's or my grandchildren's education. There are tremendous worries about what the curriculum offer will be, the discipline regime, which I've read a great deal about, and all sorts of ways in which I really wish we could find better ways of providing for our children the sort of education that we think is suitable for them in Hertfordshire. However, I do understand the constraints of all that, but my real concern is for the ESC. I've been involved over the years quite a lot with the North Herts one, and therefore obviously with Stevenage as well, because they've been joined at the hip for many years. It's been quite a painful process unjoining from the hip. So I've been to that building and I know how awful it is and I know how much it needs improving. However, what I am not clear from the papers and from what we're being asked today is to what extent the ESC will continue to be our ESC, will continue to be part of the collegiate bucketful of ESCs who work together for the best possible outcomes for some of the most challenged children in our communities, and what implications it will have, this ESC being joined to the Michaela School, about which I have no faith whatever.
Kate, would you like to respond to Judy's comments, please?
Yeah, thank you. Judy, the DFE have, as the report says, have agreed to include the ESC as part of the overall scheme. That is just in the delivery and the construction of new school buildings for the ESC. The ESC remains a Hertfordshire County maintained provision on Hertfordshire County Council site. It is just that it shares, you know, or is adjacent to a free school, but it will remain, in terms of its integrity and governance arrangements, it will remain a HCC delivered and an HCC site. So it's just the project which is combined in terms of the delivery, the buildings, if that helps clarify that point.
Well, if I could just come back very quickly, is that clearly and utterly understood by the Michaela School, the local community in Stevenage, and everybody else who needs to have it spelt out as clearly as possible? Because I'm not entirely certain that it is, and that maybe some comms work needs to be done to make that absolutely clear to the local community.
Yeah, happy to take that away and pick that up.
Thank you.
And Judy, I recognise what you're saying in terms of the clarity of it. My understanding of this was that, in a sense, it's a win situation for Stevenage ESC. That although setting aside your concerns about Michaela, what we are doing here is we are contributing money to a project that will deliver a new buildings for the Hertfordshire Stevenage ESC, as Kate has described. So rather than, if you like, settling for a collection of inappropriate buildings, we are moving to the right level of building and delivery for the ESC, and I don't think I can put it any stronger than that. But
okay,
I'm convinced that it is going to be a Hertfordshire ESC.
Okay, just before I turn my mic off, and I promise I will, I just want to make it absolutely clear to anybody who needs to know that my concerns about the Michaela School itself remain huge, unfathomable, and really, really worrying. But thank you for that reassurance.
We hear that, but I am very much focused on the ESC. But Jeff, sorry, just before we come to Jeff, hold on a moment, Jeff. Kate, sure. I've not sort of strayed away from the factual elements of this at all, have I? I haven't.
Sorry, no, you haven't. That's correct. Yeah.
Good. Okay, Jeff. Apologies.
No problem, Terry. No problem. Now, just a question, just for clarity, really, on the Section 106 issue, if you like. You mentioned that obviously it's very much reliant on Section 106 money coming forward that hasn't actually been received yet. And I just wondered, are these from developments that have received planning approval from the local planning authority, or not, as the case may be? And is that Section 106 directed specifically towards this project, or just towards education generally? Because obviously there's a risk issue there. So interested to hear your comments on that.
I'll jump in before Kate comes in, and then she can correct me again if needs be. But my understanding is that the 106 agreement is directed specifically at secondary education, and this is a secondary ESC, so it would fall within that terminology rather than a wider, looser education wording. But Kate, would you like to answer Jeff's question?
So you're entirely correct, Terry. So there's two parts to the 106. We have 106 monies already secured, and part of the recommendations in section 3 seek approval to commit the money that we've already got towards this scheme. And the majority of the funding is yet to be received, but it is from housing developments which have planning permission and are signed and sealed section 106. So the agreements are there, but obviously, as you understand, usually the funding relates to triggers in occupations and the development of that development trajectory, which haven't yet. So it means the monies haven't yet been received, but they are agreed.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's the clarity I wanted. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Mark.
Thank you very much, Terry. And I heard Judy's concerns about the Michaela School. I don't know the Michaela School, and it just goes back to my earlier comment about fractured education. Once you start bringing in outside groups, it's very much more difficult to make sure that the quality and the standards and the values, not the standards so much, the values of the schools are as we would want them. But that wasn't really my main point. First of all, I think it's excellent news from the ESC's point of view that they're going to be able to replace their dilapidated buildings with buildings fit for purpose. And I think that is tremendous. I'm a huge enthusiast of successful ESCs. I'm on the management committee of Chesbrook. And just in passing, I would make an observation that in the quality impact assessment, the way the numbers are calculated about attendance at ESCs misses a huge point that certainly applies to Chesbrook. And I will, in that point, take slight exception. I slightly disagree with Judy. The ESCs seem to be very individual in how they approach it. Chesbrook is doing a massive amount of outreach. So when you look at the number of students it reaches, it's way more than the capacity of its building and the notional number of figures that are recorded in this equality statement. And I just think that the county's got to be aware that now it's about going out to schools, not children coming to the ESCs as the way they're approaching their life. And different ESCs are different qualities. So there's a certain tension between them as to which is the right approach, and that's maybe healthy. But anyway, that's not really the key point. The key point is it's excellent news that the money is going into the ESC, and long may it flourish. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Richard Thake.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just to echo a part of what Judy has said, I have been involved with the North Hertfordshire and the Stevenage GSC when it was two separate but conjoined elements, and I'm still a governor at North Herts ESC or trustee or management member, because we keep changing the titles. The reason for my coming in here is that essentially the current head of the Stevenage GSC is now in a position of executive head of the North Herts ESC. I shan't go into the reasons behind it and why that's nothing to do with us here, but I think it is reasonable and fair. I don't think it debars me from taking an interest here, but clearly I need to declare that there is a relationship between myself and the head of the ESC by virtue of the fact that he is now the executive head of another ESC in which I'm a governor. So in my opinion, that doesn't disbar me, but I think just for transparency purposes, I make that declaration. If other people believe that it goes beyond my interpretation of my competency to vote in this matter, perhaps they will tell me.
We'll wait to hear if there is any comment back from Democratic Services. But in the meantime, let me move on to Asif.
No, thank you. And I just wanted to, I think nobody here, has anything against investing in secondary school education and improving buildings and so on. But I think Judy's concerns are absolutely valid about this Michaela School. And those concerns, where I think in one report I read about this was that, the it flies against some of the most established teaching principles of the 21st century, like no group work as an example, and single files. It's very regimental, almost like a boot camp regime approach. So my question is much more strategic. How we, almost, I know Ofsted has that quality control within schools, but just how we can, as a county, influence some of those negative elements that have been prescribed to this school. It's just, it is concerning. I'm concerned about it. Although it's wonderful to establish, to invest in buildings and have secondary schools, but I have got concerns, and how to express those concerns. I am in a quandary about this, and that's something just I thought I'll share with you.
Asif, I think we're in danger of moving away from the substance of this particular item into individual concerns, comments about a particular school and a particular method of teaching in that particular school as it exists in Wembley, and as it may exist if that style is maintained in Stevenage at the Michaela School. What we are looking at here is really a property issue. It's purely a property issue. It's the fact that the Department for Education is planning to build a free school on the site that was previously occupied by one of our county schools and also the ESC. As a result of that, they have said that they will build a new ESC if we contribute the money for it, and we will get benefits if you like, not financial benefits, but we'll get the benefit of the overall building development, which will include, as a separate entity, the ESC. And that is what we're getting on this basis. It's not going to be, as I said earlier, it's not going to be part of the Michaela School. They are two separate elements. And what we could have done is we could have said, well, we'll stick to the old buildings that were not fit for purpose, and we will make the best of them. What we're proposing here as part of the part one identification that you've got, and also, of course, importantly, the part two funding streams, which you have the opportunity to see, but they are part two items, the ability to build a new, pretty much, I think, a completely new ESC, and that's something that we don't want to turn down. And it will be a benefit. The ESC is the ESC. It's not part of any other school. Is that a fair comment, Kate?
Yeah. Yeah, can I come back? I mean, if it's absolutely clear, and the minutes note our disapproval of, of the methodology, absolutely in favour of the new ESC and the investment. I think nobody can't, but it's the other thing. But you're right. Okay, if it's clearly like that, and the minutes reflect that, and our concerns are noted, I think from my perspective, it's we can vote for that perspective clearly.
Well, I think the minutes will reflect what is said at this meeting, and of course you'll be aware that anybody after this meeting can tune in and hear the comments that are made on the recording of the meeting, so they will be able to hear those things as well. But Kate, have I said anything that have I misrepresented anything at all?
No, Terry, that's fine. I mean, I've heard the concerns too. I think Michaela is keen to be part of the family of schools in Stevenage, is my understanding. And I know indeed that they have engaged with the ESC, which will be its neighbour when this project is delivered. At the end of the day, it's the Secretary of State's final decision in relation to signing a funding agreement for the Michaela School to provide education at that site.
But of course, it's fair to say that the ESC will take children from a range of schools in Stevenage and not just from any one school.
Absolutely, it serves the whole town, yeah. And these, I mean, for those of you that know the head at the ESC, he's very enthusiastic. He's very passionate about delivering excellent provision to those young people. He does a really good job in his current buildings, and is very excited about the prospect of having new buildings that he's involved in the design of for those young people.
Okay. I've got Nick and Anthony, but I would ask you to contain your comments, please, to the subject in the agenda, which is including the part re-provision of Stevenage Education Support Centre, and it's the capital funding element. So, Nick.
Yes, well, I share Asif's disquiet, and Asif seems to have been mollified by the subsequent comments, and I understood the framework in which we work, and I understand what we're trying to do. However, I think there's a bit of an ethical question here about to what extent in doing something for the general good of education in Hertfordshire, we also facilitate something which some of us are quite disturbed about. I asked that question. And I reserve my right, I'm sorry to drop this on Mark, to abstain on this issue. If I so judge.
I hear what you say, Nick, and I hear what others have said, but I would come back to the point that we are really talking about the provision, the vehicle for the provision of a new rebuilt ESC in Stevenage.
Okay, clarify that vehicle, please.
Sorry?
Could you just clarify that vehicle?
The vehicle is the fact that DFE are building new buildings, and we are contributing to the cost of the buildings, which will be identified specifically for the ESC as part of a project, a building project. That's right, isn't it, Kate?
Where does Michaela come into it?
Michaela will be the managers of. I
rest my case.
I'm sorry, Nick. I'm not going to get into the whole business of talking about Michaela. Frankly, I don't think it would matter whether it was Michaela or whether it was any other school, free school operator. It just so happens that it is, but it's the fact that it's going to be a new school building and that will provide additional new rebuilt facilities for Stevenage ESC. And if it's up to you how you vote, but if that were to be not approved today, that would be a huge loss for the benefit of the young people in Stevenage.
If I can come in there, Terry, as well. I think you're right. Currently, the DFE is delivering a 6 FE free school as part of its free school programme. The only reason we're talking about the ESC element is that as part of the DFE's project, it is impacting the current ESC buildings. If the ESC wasn't currently occupying part of a building that they were going to demolish, then we wouldn't be having this conversation. The DFE would be dealing with delivering a 6 FE on that site. We would have nothing to do with it because it's a free school central government run programme, and the ESC would be left adjacent in its existing buildings in poor condition. The fact that the DFE is demolishing the buildings, part of which the ESC occupies, gives us an opportunity to address the poor condition of those buildings and get re-provision of the ESC as part of that overall scheme. It is the building scheme that is a part of. And even if the ESC wasn't part of this scheme, the DFE could ask the County Council for the Section 106 monies it had received for secondary education, and could ask for all of that into the pot, with or without the ESC. I hope that helps explain.
It does to me. Anthony?
Thank you very much indeed, Terry. I mean, I understand, and I'm grateful for Kate and yourself indeed for explaining the connections. I do associate myself very strongly with the comments made, particularly by Judy and Asif, but also by Nick, regarding the misgivings that I have with this particular free school enterprise and their ethos. And I express the hope, though it's a hope, I'm not sure whether it's based on a lot of experience of hopes actually being fulfilled and met, that the school will indeed be able to chime with the ethos of the schools that community schools that exist in Stevenage. So I shall support, but I'm not sure whether I'm mollified, but I shall support on the basis of what the report is asking us to agree. But I very much hope that those comments that come from various colleagues will be embraced in the minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Richard Thake, and then Mark Watkin, and then I think we will draw a line under it and move to the recommendation.
I just want to highlight the import of what Anthony said in his final sentence there. We are looking at what the papers are asking us to agree. For all of the other considerations, and I don't want to get involved in that, for all of the other considerations, I don't see any mechanism in the paperwork for that to impact upon what we have to do for the quality of education and the provision of education buildings in Hertfordshire. So I think Anthony absolutely got it right when he summed up there, essentially saying it's what's on the papers that we're looking at.
Thank you, Richard. And then Mark.
Might be very brief again, Terry. I just think it is a fact of life that we don't have the control over the types of schools that come into this area as we would like to have. And Michaela is clearly a very controversial school education deliverer, but we would have no say over that. And we have no say of that. And I, like you and like Kate, just want to stress that what we're talking about here is improving the provision to children who are in great need of support in Stevenage area, and there's no ethical choice here. We would be failing in our responsibility not to give those children the best possible resources we can. They need it. If ever a group need it, it's those children who are failing to address education in mainstream schools. I'm sorry, guys, but we're in a world where the DFE can do what they like with school sites. We should be grateful that we've at least got a chance to get the ESC improved. So yes. No ethical qualms about this. I have a fundamental objection to the way education is managed in the country, but that's not a matter for this discussion today.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. Nick, you wanted to come back with one final word. I did say it would be Mark, but go on. I'll carry on.
Okay. Look, I hear what people have said. I do understand it. I guess. It's a question, what is the best, greater good that will result. So yeah, I will support it, having listened to everybody in the officers. But I really think we ought to find a way of registering a strong disapproval of the published ethos of the managing company for one of these facilities, namely Michaela School. I mean, they don't hide what their views are or what they're trying to achieve. I'm a strong believer that we do our best for our children, but we don't own them. And we certainly, I don't think, have any moral right to force kids through a system of education that we ourselves wouldn't tolerate. Thinking of the parents' view there. But having said all of that, I do urge, please, that our disquiets are recorded, and I will go along with voting for it on the basis that I have strong reservation.
Nick, I'm grateful to you for your clarification, but I would echo Mark Watkins' comments, and we really do need to separate any one person's considered opinions about education or the style of education with what is being presented here for the benefit of the young people of Stevenage. And that's so important. Right, I think now we can go. You've had an opportunity to consider the elements in the Part 2 paper. There are no recommendations, as I said, so if we can go to the recommendations as shown on the papers at item 3.1, and there are 5 recommendations, please. And thank you very much indeed, everybody. That has been agreed. There is no other Part 1 business. So that concludes the business for today. Thank you all very much indeed for your contributions. They are very much appreciated. The date of the next joint meeting is at 9:30 to consider the specialist resource provision, and that's on the 15th of March 2021. I bid you a good day, and pleased to note that the sun is shining, and we'll just wait for the live stream to be turned off before I ask you to leave the meeting.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. Bye. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.